You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
I went on a super secret church hunt a couple days ago, and I think I would call it successful. I'm going to call it marginally successful. My wife and I were at a wedding in Connecticut. I was telling you about the wedding over the last few episodes as we're talking about Nehemiah chapter 10 here. And the wedding, by the way, was glorious. That's about as much fun as I've ever had at one of those. The vibe, it was great. And maybe I'm a little biased toward it because it felt different than normal weddings. Geographically, we were in Connecticut, which is awesome, by the way. Who knew Connecticut was as lovely and beautiful and quaint as it actually is? I had no clue. I feel like I'd seen it before, but I had not seen it before. So we're in Western Connecticut. Everything was awesome. It was a great time. And after that, I had a little bit of time to go and do some exploring. And when I have extra time, I go and explore churches because that's what I like to do. And in this case, it was a special church that we were going to go and look for because it's a church that my ancestors planted. It's the first Baptist church that ever existed in Connecticut. It was founded in 1705, and I wanted to go see if anything was left of it. So my wife and I drove down to Groton, Connecticut / Mystic, Connecticut. We drive way back out into the backwoods, and I figured out pretty quick, all right, there's probably not going to be much left here, just based on how remote this is. And sure enough, there was no church left when I got there, but the graveyard was still there, which is beautiful in a way, but also overgrown and kind of spooky and kind of a Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod Crane kind of manner. The church, maybe I was able to figure out where it stood once. It looked like there were maybe a couple of stones that might not have been natural that I could find on the ground that maybe were the foundation of this, what would now be 320-year-old church. But ultimately, I stood there looking at the graveyard and thinking, man, there's a lot of people in there. That's a lot of families. It's a lot of years of history represented there. It's a lot of resources represented there. My family name is all over that graveyard. Thinking, man, it's just crazy how much human and economic productivity happened is represented by the number of gravestones here. And also that the church that clearly meant so much to them, where they were married and buried and all the other things that happen in church, all the joys and grief of life and the growth subtly over time and the huge epiphanies and just all the great things that happen in church, that building's no longer here. What happened? Well, there's a lot of benign explanations for that. It looks like the center of town migrated both east and west, and the location of that church that made sense in 1705 didn't make sense as time went on. Could be ultimately the church there that my ancestors founded and pastored over 3 generations for 150 years. It's crazy. 3 pastors, all from my family, in succession, pastored that church for the first 150 years of its existence. But eventually, like so many of the churches that I saw around New England on this visit, they merged with another church to make the resources work or make sense, and then the merged church goes somewhere else. In this case, they merged with another Baptist church and are now known as the Union Baptist Church of Mystic, Connecticut, which is like a block up the street from Mystic Pizza, which is kind of famous. That was sort of cool. Like I said, there's benign explanations for why that church that so many people cared about and invested in so much is now gone. But there's also an economic explanation. At some point, it financially did not make sense to continue to do things the way they were doing things. It did not make sense, or they didn't have the money to maintain an architecture style from 1705 in 1850 or whenever they merged and it went away. It's very expensive to keep up old stone buildings, the kind of buildings that tell a story of this grandiose God and that draw the eye upward. I mean, my friends from more high church traditions are rightly very proud of the beautiful buildings their traditions have made. But there's another side to that coin as well, which is that so many of those buildings that look beautiful on the outside can't be maintained And it would cost more than what it would cost to build 10 new churches to try to prop up and fix and repair that beautiful old stone church. And so gradually they go empty, or they fall down or catch fire. I think of the one in St. Louis, the St. Laborious. That's the name of it. I mean, I went and did a video there, and then like a month later, the thing completely burned down and is just gone. It's super expensive to maintain these things. And every time somebody builds a church, they do so with the intention to fund it forever. They count the cost. They're doing their best to set up future generations to make it go. But it's just really, really difficult to sustain such a thing because time changes. And it's very hard to future-proof the economics of a spiritual life that revolves around that facility, around that building. Where am I going with all of this? Why am I telling you all of this? One, I went to Connecticut. It was a really nice trip. I saw this cool stuff, and I thought you might find it interesting. Two, because I think it relates hugely to Nehemiah 10 and this covenant that all of these people from the song are ratifying together. You got the grand procession, which is a song and all the names. Then metaphorically, you've got the statement of purpose. Brothers, dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to renew this covenant and to ratify this with the one true God. Then you get past that and you get into the actual clauses, the actual vows. And as we've seen over the last couple of days of our conversation, clause number 1 is we're not going to keep making the same mistakes we've been making for hundreds of years. We're not going to keep intermarrying with our neighbors and bringing in all of their bad ideas. Different time, as we've discussed, a very different situation, very unique situation, but that was something they needed to do in this context with who they were in this time. Then clause number 2 of the vows is we're going to do business different, and we're going to honor the Sabbath as part of how we do business. This is very short. This is only a couple of sentences for these 2 clauses. But now the rest of this covenant from Nehemiah 10:32 basically to the end of the chapter, I mean, it's probably like 5 times the amount of total volume of material as those first 2 vows that I just mentioned. The rest of this is just trying to future-proof the life surrounding the temple, trying to come up with a covenant for how we're going to fund this thing so that economic realities don't break these things we're promising to do with the best of intentions. Spiritually, we might be in a great place right now, they are all saying, but economically, it's really hard to be in that place when you didn't plan carefully, and you do have a geographically centered expression of faith that revolves very much around this sacred building. I mean, you got to have a funding model for this. Now, in the past, the funding model for how to make the temple go and the walls in Jerusalem and all of this stuff in the age of exile, the age that we've been looking at in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, has been wait until the winds of popular opinion blow in your direction. Wait until it is politically expedient for one of the Achaemenid kings, Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, to like you and shower you with blessings very publicly, probably for his own purposes, but whatever, that's how politics works. And then when that money comes in, you pounce on it and you build something new. Well, that's not very sustainable. And clearly, Nehemiah, Ezra, and the people here, they all knew that because they've got all of this material that we're going to look at over the next few days with the rest of this covenant that is all about moving away from that unsustainable model for funding this and moving toward a self-funded model that they are going to commit themselves to and their kids to and their grandkids to, and that is going to continue to be in place all the way up till now, I guess you could say. I mean, the temple tax that they're about to put in place right here with this covenant, the third vow of this covenant that we're going to look at is establishing or reestablishing, recommitting to the ancient temple tax from each household. This thing was still in place in the book of Matthew, as we'll discuss in coming days. And there's a whole miracle around it when it comes time to pay the temple tax, and the temple tax is found in the mouth of a fish on the Sea of Galilee. So, I mean, this worked, it stuck, and frankly, it's pretty good forethought on their part to say, we need to ratify a covenant that accounts for setting this thing up for success moving forward into the future. So, verse 32 of Nehemiah 10, they all promised together, "We assume the responsibility for carrying out the commands to give 1/3 of a shekel each year for the service of the house of our God, for the bread set out at the table, for the regular grain offerings and burnt offerings, for the offerings of the Sabbaths, new moon festivals, and appointed feasts, for the holy offerings, for sin offerings, to make atonement for Israel, and for all the duties of the house of our God." Well, it's huge. It's voluntary, personal responsibility. Nobody is making them do that. Nobody is making them commit not just to having a building that's a quaint relic of things from the past that I guess our ancestors were kind of into, but rather no one is making them commit to it as the central hub of their religious and cultural life, not just for them, but for all of the descendants of Abraham scattered all around the great Persian Empire. No, they're choosing this for themselves because they understand that God has dwelt among them in that temple and that it is meant to be understood to be the center hub of the whole sacrificial system, which is so crucial in the Old Testament relationship between God and his chosen people. But they know that if they don't come up with any kind of funding model, and their plan is just to hope that everybody remains forever, for centuries, on the camp high that we feel right now, that model is stupid, and the building, it's not going to work out. Nothing is going to work out. They're going to have to institute something that will last, and what they end up instituting, as we've seen in the verses we just looked at, and as we'll see through the rest of Nehemiah chapter 10, is a way of thinking that says the first money that we earn, it's not even ours. This is God's blessing and God's bounty, and we are giving it back to God. We are momentary custodians of this, and in the physical world, they seem to understand that money represents human energy, human capital, the investment of human time, and that though money is often a very crass thing to discuss, it is needed to buy the time from the people and the resources and to nurture the expertise that is needed to make this temple system go. Now, there are probably a bajillion people who were involved with this thing. Probably we read, or rather sang, a bunch of their names. Here earlier in Nehemiah chapter 10, there were probably tons of people who were like, I would do this for free. This is the thing I believe in most. Of course I would do it for free. But also they're dads, and they have families, and families were much bigger and more extended at this time. They have responsibilities for that. And so wanting to do it for free, that is temple stuff, is nice. But there's a reality here, and the reality is in order for them to provide and be the head of a household, they would have to take a bunch of time and go do practical trade time for money kind of tasks just to meet those needs, and there wouldn't be time left for them to lean into their area of expertise and to make this temple stuff happen. We can be frustrated by how money works in a physical, fallen world where we live, but the truth is money represents human capital and the resources to sustain people. And these people were realists. They knew that if there was not a financial system that was voluntary yet binding, built into place, that their building was going to end up like the church building that my ancestors planted and nurtured for all those years. And now I can't even find for sure a single stone that it was made out of. I don't think anybody failed there. It's just that's the fate of most of these things unless something really remarkable happens. And what I see here is them doing their very best to say, we practically understand that it takes a lot to make something like this happen, to realize something like a temple and a temple system and to fund it and to hire and to pay for excellence in the people who will lead us. And so, all right, this is how we're going to do it. This is a way that we can pull it off. But I got to say, tip of the cap to the people here in 444 BC who are trying to figure this out, not just for the moment, but how to make it work for the super ultra long haul so that the truths and the presence of God and the clarity that they are feeling in this moment can be handed down and be a blessing to generations to come. All right, I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.